Have you ever sat and stared up at the stars and wondered, where did we come from? Let's take a journey like no other, not to a place, but to a time. Join us as we delve deep into the human past and explore our shared human origins. Welcome to the world of paleoanthropology.
Hello, everybody. This is Seth Chagi with the World of Paleoanthropology, and today we have another very special guest, Dr. Carol Ward. Why don't you introduce yourself for us?
Absolutely. Thanks, Seth, for having me. I'm really excited to be part of this fantastic series. I am a paleoanthropologist. My name is Carol Ward. I got my degree at Johns Hopkins a very long time ago, in 1990, and I've been at the University of Missouri ever since. I'm really interested and passionate about understanding where we came from as a species. Humans are unusual species, and we're the phenomenal biological puzzle. And of course, what's everyone's favorite subject to talk about? Themselves. So we're all having interested in this. And I study the fossil record for human evolution because we can learn about human evolution through studying modern primates, about studying modern behavior, modern human variation, all kinds of things. But the only source of evidence we have for the sort of acquisition and timing of the key human characteristics is the fossil record. That's where the questions come from. And that's where the information comes from. That's where ideas come from and our tests of ideas come from. And so I'm really passionate about studying fossils. I study not only the earliest part of the human fossil record, going back to Australopithecus, but I'm also really interested in the whole radiation of apes that preceded the appearance of our ancestors that lived in a time period called the Miocene between about 20 and about 5 million years ago. There were probably hundreds of species of great apes all over the old world in Africa, Europe, Asia during that time period. One of those gave rise to modern chimps and humans. And so what I want to do is understand to get how we get to that ancestor. We need to know what came before. If you want to understand how you get to point B, you've got to establish what point A is. And it turns out to be really challenging. So I spend a lot of my time trying to sort out the origins of our story, because all good stories start at the beginning, right? And so that's what I'm really interested in. So I study that. To do that, I use anatomy. Fossils are represented as bones. So we need to understand what those bones are. We need to know what muscles attach to those bones and how they operate a skeleton. To do that, we might need to understand the nerves and the vessels and other things to make informed interpretation. So I also teach human anatomy as I study fossils.
And that's great. I love it when people take a multidisciplinary approach to, I think that's required in paleoanthropology. I don't think paleoanthropology is a single field. I don't think it works that way. And taking the medical approach and the anatomical approach, I think is very important, because we can learn so much just about where we've come from, just based on what you said about the fossils and everything. Now, in the last 10 years, there's definitely been an enormous amount of finds compared to the last 50 or so. How has that changed your views and how you work with what you're doing?
Sure. Well, yeah, it's an astonishing time period for studying human evolution. We've actually only really known much of our understanding of human origins is really only about 100 years old, or a little less than 100 years. And in that time period, about half of what the fossil record we have, maybe not half, has been discovered just in the last very few decades. And there's an increasing pace of discovery. It's just so exciting. It's hard to keep up. It used to be, oh, there's a new fossil and we could all go study it. And then we'd wait a while and the next new fossil would come along. So what's really exciting is the picture is becoming more complicated, much more nuanced and much more real. And we have a whole appreciation that we are not alone in this universe. Humans are part of a branchy, bushy family tree. And there were lots of different experiments in being a hominin, lots of different species, some of which may have even seen each other on occasion across the environment, we don't know. But we're looking at this incredible diversity and this radiation of animals, which is a fundamentally different way to think about ourselves than being some sort of special, unique lineage, unlike any other. It's bringing us into the biological world and into a realistic context like we see for the evolution of all these other animals and plants and life on Earth. So it's really exciting. There is so much to know that I think we're all just trying to scramble as fast as we can to get a handle on how we can make sense out of all this fossil material. The other thing that's been happening is not just fossils, but technology and methods to get data and information from these fossils with CT scanning, all kinds of new imaging protocols, and of course, genetics, which is not what I do, but is phenomenally important to proteomics, and all these new tools we have to make sense of the fossils we have. We can take small pieces of fossil now and say a whole host of things about them. So it's amazing. It's really, really fun.
And speaking of technology, I'm sure you're aware of what Leebergers is doing right now with the synchrotron. And I know that's been a project 10 years in the making, they've said, and we finally have the technology to do that. And like you said, the more technology we have, the more we can find out from things we've had from 100 years ago. Even discoveries that aren't new, we have new things to learn about them.
Absolutely. The synchrotron is a phenomenal imaging tool. You can see incredible detail down to 10 microns, so hundreds of millimeter. I was fortunate enough to work on the Turkana baby from Ethiopia, the 3 million-year-old baby of Lucy species called Australopithecus afarensis. Your viewers may be familiar with that, but Australopithecus was the name of the animal first identified by Raymond Dart in South Africa in 1925 as a fossil human ancestor that was early, means southern ape, and Africanus from Africa. And so the genus Australopithecus, we now have a whole bunch of different versions or species. The one from the Afar region of Ethiopia is called Afarensis. Lucy is the most famous fossil from there, but Lucy's child, they called it in the press, is not really Lucy's child, is a little baby, and it came in this block of material all smashed up together, sort of like some of the South African fossils. So Zerai Alam-Zeged, the discoverer, took it to the synchrotron, and we were able to extract the matrix from around the fossil and actually see what the bones of this little tiny baby look like. So I've worked with those data, and they're phenomenal. It's really exciting. And to be able to look at all the new South African fossils will be really stunning.
Yeah, like you said, it's definitely an amazing time to be in this field and learning everything that we do. So how did you get involved in this field? What brought you to learning about human evolution?
Well, just like you and I were chatting before we went on air, you took a class in biological anthropology and fell in love, and that's exactly what happened to me. I've told this story before, but I was between my freshman and sophomore years of college at the University of Michigan, and I went to work at a big amusement park in Ohio. I didn't really care for that for a variety of reasons. People would ride on the ride and they would throw up and I had to clean it, and I got tired of that. So I decided to take a class. And since it was a summer, I wanted to take something weird, and I asked all my friends, what's the weirdest class in the course catalog? And they said, biological anthropology, it's cavemen and stuff. And I thought, cavemen? Take classes in cavemen, sign me up. And knowing nothing, I signed up for this class, I fell in love, and here I am today.
Amazing. And I find that that story is so common, that paleoanthropology or anthropology in general just has such an alluring effect on people that people either don't care at all, or people are just gung-ho about it. And when you find those people, it is just so much fun. So tell us about some of the work that you've done. I know you've made many trips to Africa. You've done a lot of work in Kenya. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned to you, my research involves not just studying fossils that have already been found, but I also the only way to get more fossils is to go out and look for fossils. And so I'm part of a collaborative field project called the West Turkana Paleo Project. It is co-led by me and Dr. Frederick Chalo-Manthi, who's the Director of Sites and Monuments actually for the country of Kenya now. He was head of earth sciences at the National Museums of Kenya. He got his PhD in Cape Town. He's been a trained paleontologist. And so the two of us and another colleague called Mike Plavkin, he's at the University of Arkansas. He's a professor that studies cranial faces and teeth and things of monkeys and variation and how we can get at behavior from fossils, which is cool. So the three of us co-lead this project. Our fossils deposits that we explore are in the very, very farthest northwest corner of the country of Kenya. Way up in that corner is a big lake called Lake Turkana, which any of your paleoanthro fans out there will have heard of. On the east side of the lake is where the Leakeys did a lot of their work, on the west side too. We're working on the west side now, and we have a number of different sites that we've explored. The first big effort that we had was at a site called Kanapoi, which is 4.2 million years old, and it is the earliest site that we have Australopithecus so far. So it's the very origin of the lineage. We did a huge project there and published a whole bunch of papers on all the different animals that were from the site, everything from not just monkeys and elephants and bovids, but gastropods and frogs and fish and crocodiles, to try to get a real idea of what the environment was like at the origins of Australopithecus. So that was really fun. We are towards the end, if COVID will let us finish, of another field project at a site called Lomekwi. And Lomekwi is neat because this is a site that's a little over the 3.5 million years old. And it's where Meave Leakey and her team in the 90s found what they claimed is a new species of hominin called Kenyanthropus platyops. And the Kenyanthropus skull, I can show you a cast here, is amazing, but it's pretty distorted and crushed, and it's led to some controversy and disagreement. So we wanted to go back and really test the hypothesis. Is there a separate species there, or could this be more of Lucy's species of Australopithecus? Also in 2015, archaeologist called Sonia Harmand, who leads the West Turkana Archaeological Project, unrelated, found evidence of the very earliest stone tool technology at Lomekwi. They called it the Lomekwian. And so, you think of making stone tools like Oldowan tools, the traditional tools. You hold something in your hand, you hold something else in the other hand, and you whack the thing in your hand and you knock off flakes. And that's your tool. Archaeologists are going to hate me talking about this, but that's a basic plan. I'm not an archaeologist. But the Lomekwian tools, there's these huge basalt cobbles, and they're heavy, and you hold them with two hands, and you have a big stone here, and you hold another one, and you just take two hands and you whack the stone on the other stone to knock off flakes. So it's fundamentally different from any other tools. It's almost 1 million years earlier than any other tools.
Wow.
And so our goal is to find out if Kenyanthropus platyops was our first tool maker, or was this afarensis, or was there something special about the site and the place that hominids were using tools that we don't see elsewhere, or maybe we don't know. And so we completed our field work there, and we haven't really been able to do a lot of analysis yet because we've all been grounded by the pandemic, but we'll have some answers. We found some lovely fossils, hundreds and hundreds of new fossils. We have a mandible of a little tiny baby of this species and a lot of other teeth and so forth, so we're waiting to analyze those. And our newest project that we have only barely begun, again, we've been delayed, is looking at a site that has some of the earliest evidence of anatomically modern humans, maybe up to 250,000 years ago. A site way, way, way north. It's a brand new site called Netodomeri. And we're just in the middle of the fieldwork phase of that. So we do a lot of field work in addition to studying the fossils that we have, and I've been fortunate to work on other people's fossils too. So
that is amazing. And hearing all this new evidence that you're talking about, I'm very excited to read the papers when they come out, and
me too.
and hear all about it, because it just sounds so exciting. Now, as we've mentioned, you're a professor, of course. what would be your number one piece of advice to your students who wanted to follow in your footsteps?
Get experience, get involved. Try to, if you have the means to attend a field school, go to a field school. If you have a way to get involved, to go see seminars or speakers at your school or in your community, do that. If you don't have anyone nearby you that studies fossils, find someone who maybe does archaeology or biology. Get involved, try research. The tools we use in science and research are universal. The more experience you get, the better. Study science also. Get involved and study science, I would say, and just get out there. People love, those of us who do this for a living, we like to study and learn about science. We also like to share that with the next generation. We teach as well. And so I love it when I get a call from someone and say, hey, I'm a student, such and so, I'd love to be involved in your lab or hear something. And you can start a dialogue and create connections. And it's really important. And some of I, for example, never had the opportunity to attend field work. It was beyond my means at the time. So I never was able to go to field school overseas. I did some archaeology field school closer to home, and that still gave me huge amounts of experience. And just have a sense of wonder and ask questions. Ask questions. We don't know everything. In some ways, the more we learn, the less we know. And just keep asking the questions, because I'm sure you have a good idea, a good question out there that we haven't thought of. So don't hesitate, dive in.
Definitely. And, I have a little saying that kind of goes along with world of paleoanthropology, that is never stop learning, because there's always more. There's never, you think you know everything, and then boom, there's a new species we've never even seen before that changes everything.
Oh, exactly.
And it's just, I think out of the STEM fields, paleoanthropology is one of the fastest moving. And for some, that's hard to keep up with. There's just so much going on.
There isn't. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. What do you think, just since we're still kind of in the beginning of 2022, what do you think the biggest or the most important discovery of 2021 was?
I think the things that have really gotten me really excited are the new work in proteomics people are starting to look at older fossils. That's not necessarily directly 2021. I'm sort of being looser than that. But I think new fossils are fantastic, and that's all good. But finding new tools to get answers out of the fossils we have is really important. And, of course, we have DNA from Neanderthals and some other sort of fairly recent, pretty human-like fossil relatives. But scientists and DNA are really long, complicated molecules. And the longer they sit around inside a fossil of the ground, they break into little tiny pieces. So Jurassic Park's a lovely idea, but getting DNA that's strung together in long enough sentences that we can read it is really challenging. But now scientists are really clever, and they can actually get proteins out of things like teeth. Teeth are really hard. They preserve things inside them really well. And you can actually get protein sequences, look at the molecules and compare those. And that is really exciting. And I think, I believe some of the South African fossils have been taken up for proteomics work. It takes special circumstances to preserve and so on and so forth. So we don't know how much we're all going to get, how far back. But I think, to me, that's a particularly exciting new avenue of research. And I get to watch them sometimes, but.
Most definitely, though. I mean, again, going back to the new tools for old fossils thing is just, the things we know now, we never could have possibly known 100 years ago, even if we had the same evidence. And I think, as time passes, we'll just learn more and more. And one thing I like that I'm seeing multiple anthropologists starting to do is they'll find something and they'll purposely not completely excavate it, so they can leave it for future generations, because they know there's just so much to do. And I think that's great, versus the idea maybe 30, 50 years ago, where it was, let's get everything right now because we need it right now, and we need to have it
Excuse me.
in our possession almost, where, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, it kind of depends sometimes when you're finding things. For example, the Laetoli footprint trail in Tanzania is 3.6 million year old trail that preserves hominid footprints and footprints of lots of other animals. And that's on the surface. So when you find something like that, you need to expose it, cover it, whatever, right away, because it could be gone. Where I work in West Turkana, there are very high hills, and the water comes very quickly into the water, and it just washes things away. And so you can find a fossil, and if you don't pick it up, the next rainy season, it's gone into the lake. So some places we don't have the luxury. So in East Africa, we grab everything we see because it's just erosion. The South African caves, on the other hand, you have a preserved environment. You can leave things in the cave or even in the blocks of breccia to wait for more scanning and techniques for how to get them out. And so sometimes some of us just grab everything we can get our hands on. So it depends. East Africa is great because we have a really precise control on dates. This is a place where two pieces of the continent are pulling apart, they're rifting apart as continents move across the Earth's crust. Our continents are always moving around, and East Africa is splitting apart from the rest of Africa. And so it's very volcanically active. So you have these lakes and rivers, animals die. If you've ever had a fish tank before, you know how fast crud builds up in water. So the animal dies, crud builds up and buries it, eventually becomes fossilized. The ground gets pushed up, it erodes, we find it, it's great. But what happens is, as the crud is building up, there's a big volcanic explosion. And maybe over hundreds of square miles, ash has blanketed the landscape. And then more crud builds up, and there's another big explosion, and then more crud with dead animals fills up. And we can use chemical methods. Geologists can use chemical methods to tell exactly which volcanic eruption it is and how old it is. So we have a beautiful, terrific sequence. We know exactly how old our fossils are. The price we pay is that they're open air exposures and river exposures. Often they're fragmentary and broken into small pieces. In South Africa, you have this beautiful preservation and partial skeletons, but the controls on dating are much more challenging to figure out how old things are, and engenders controversy. So I guess you have to pick your benefits or whatever, but it's really great to have different sets of exposures that give you different information, and putting it all together is actually, it'd be great if we held it all in one place, but the world hasn't granted us that opportunity just yet.
Not yet. Hopefully one day. Now, in talking about this, it's brought up something that I sometimes think about, but I think a lot of people, they wonder, why do we keep looking in the same places for fossils? Why do we keep looking and looking and looking, even for decades? And it's every year, if it rains, the whole landscape is completely different. Something that it could show up at any time. And I think a lot of people don't realize that's why you have to keep looking, and even in places that seem like there might be something.
Yeah.
And it's just, preservation is, I think, hard for people to understand, because, like, for instance, why are we not finding anything from West Africa?
And it's true. There are only some places that we have the luxury of even finding fossils. If you take West Africa, for example, West Africa is mostly rainforest today, and it's been pretty steadily rainforest for the past 25 or more million years. Rainforest soils are really acidic. So if an animal dies, it decays very, very quickly. And even the bones will decay very quickly. We only get fossils preserved where molecule by molecule, each organic molecule can decay and be replaced by a mineral, piece of, another mineral. And that has to happen very, very slowly and under the right chemical conditions. So if you're in an acidic environment, you're not going to preserve fossils. Also, there are forests on top of the soil in West Africa, and there were forests in the soil then, and you can't find fossils underneath forests because there's forests on top of them. So you need to find a place where you have rocks of the right age, And we know, for example, there are fossil exposures all over the world. The only continent that those fossils include hominins is Africa. So we go to Africa because that's where we know hominins were. They may have been someplace else, but we don't have evidence, and it's a needle in a haystack. So we want to go to places that have fossils of the age period we're interested in, or exposures. And we need to go places where the chemical environment in the past has been such that an animal that died wasn't scavenged and carried off. It wasn't chewed up by other animals. It got buried fast enough in the right environment to turn into a fossil. And then it has to be exposed to the surface and then recognized by somebody and then collected. And the chances of that are, they say, 1 in 100 billion of an animal dying and eventually making its way into one of our museum collections. So the fact that we have any at all in some ways is astonishing. And it's only a few places that we're lucky enough to have the right environment. But that said, the middle of Chad, like the middle of Chad in the middle of the desert, has some incredibly important fossil sites that are just, you can see the curve of the earth and it's just nothing but sand, and they basically wait for this wind to blow the sand off the fossils, but they found really important fossils there. So I'm sure we haven't found all of the places that have fossils yet. I'm sure of it.
Definitely.
That's definitely not. There will be more. And we see fossils in East Africa because we find them there. We see them in South Africa because we find them there. We have some in Chad, from the early, sort of that 3 to 6 million early human evolution time period. And that's mostly it, but I'm sure hominids were everywhere in Africa. We can only just find them in some places. So I think of it, I always think of the fossil record sort of like a puzzle. When you do a jigsaw puzzle, this one picture, but you might only have a few pieces up here and a few pieces down here and a few pieces over here. And it's like these, you think the whole thing was water because that's where the water is. Or if you only found these pieces, you think the whole thing was petunias or whatever it happens to be. And if you only found these pieces, you think everything was a barn. So we're getting these pieces and filling in the picture, but the pieces only come from some places, even though there's a whole picture there. So that's how I think of it.
So with so many variables at hand, what do you think will be the next big thing? If that's even possible to even comprehend what it could be, what do you think it might be?
Discoveries? Like fossil discoveries?
Discoveries or new analysis or just big news, new headline. What's going to be the next big human evolution headline?
Well, someone's going to find some incredibly cool new fossil. We know that's going to happen. And as one of my former colleagues, Pat Shipman, said, the only thing you're guaranteed about with a new fossil is it doesn't look like you thought it would. You don't know anything else, but it's not going to look like you thought it would, which is what makes it fun. So there are a lot more teams of people out looking for fossils of all time periods now in different places. And they're going to be more phenomenal finds. I have no doubt about it. What those will be and what they look like, I don't know. We'll see how that is. So the fossils are going to continue to roll in. And what's really nice about paleoanthropology is it's becoming much more diverse. There are more teams, more people getting involved, more people from different places getting involved. And that's only going to increase our chances of finding really cool things. But I think the other thing that we're able to do is it's great to find a fossil. And you can make up a story about it and say the animal ate this or did this or whatever, and you can kind of make some comparisons. But what we really can do is try to look at maybe the soft tissues that don't preserve in the fossil record and see how they impact the bones. We're doing some work now where you can soak cadaveric materials in iodine, and you can put it through a super high-res micro CT scanner and see every single little muscle fascicle in a muscle. And then you can calculate the strength, the force generating capacity, the biomechanics, and then link that. If you know what the muscle pull is and how strong, then you can link that to the bones and the joint surfaces and proportions and say something about that. We're using that to investigate grasping in the hands and feet of primates, because losing a big toe when we became good at walking upright on 2 feet was a huge transition that shaped our lineage. And also our incredible manual dexterity is something that really sets us apart. And through these methods, we're hoping we can get some more precise information from modern animals that'll validate some of our inferences we can make about fossils. So not that my work's the next big thing, but there's ways to use new technologies and gather more information from the modern animals to bring back to the fossil record and give us able to say things much more intelligent about the fossils that we do have. And you can't study fossils too much. The other thing is, Lucy's been around since the 70s, this famous Lucy fossil, just partial skeleton, found in the 70s, the first sort of big flashy fossil, first earliest partly complete skeleton, exciting. But with all the new discoveries, every time I look, I've been studying Lucy since the 80s. Every time I go back and look at Lucy now, I see her with different eyes. I see her through the lens of all these modern discoveries. And, we can keep pushing towards new things, but going back and reviewing what we've already found is really important because we see things differently now because of what we know. So I think that's going to be everyone's kind of in a race to get so much of the stuff published. So the South African, Ethiopian fossils, especially, or waiting while COVID settles down to race to finish it. But I think there's, it's going to be a time for people to take these new fossils, do the in-depth work, comparing it to older fossils. And that's where we need to go next, as soon as we catch up a little bit. That makes sense. So I think, there'll be cool new fossils. There's going to be cool new technologies. I think the genetics of proteomics is going to continue to explode. And I think there's going to be some really thoughtful reanalysis now that we have a much broader set of data to work with. So I think those are the areas I see as being really important. And the last one isn't the flashy one at all, but in some ways it's the most important, in my opinion.
Now, this question I ask almost all my guests, and you may know what it is if you've watched previous episodes, and it's always the hardest question. What is your favorite hominin?
My favorite hominin is this is a fossil. It's a cast of a fossil of a species called either Australopithecus or Paranthropus, depending on how you like to slice your names. Ethiopicus. It's actually from Lomekwi, where we've been working. We found more pieces of this, which is really exciting. And this to me is super bizarre. These robust Australopithecines are crazy. For example, this is a mandible of a related species called boisei, and it's huge. It's absolutely enormous compared to the mandible of like you and me, the jaw. So the lower jaw here, you can see our little tiny teeth, and you could see how much bigger, crazy big this animal is. This animal is supposed to have been about 4 feet tall, and they had these huge, so it's just bananas. And so this is one of the earliest robust Australopithecine species, they call them, but doesn't have teeth anymore, but it has a tiny brain, areas for huge, big chewing muscles that would fill all of this up. And it would have come with really big teeth like the boisei, that I think these robust are the most fascinating and weird hominins that we have. I don't know, my personal favorite fossil is probably a Kembo from 20 million years ago in the Miocene, which is one of the firstest apes. It walked on all fours. My first paper in 1991 showed that it didn't have a tail, and that tail loss wasn't associated with being upright and orthograde. And my dissertation was on that. I looked at, they had very monkey-like bodies. They weren't built like modern apes. And that was my early work. And I was very partial to that too. But the best hominids are robust, that's for sure.
I don't know if anyone's had an answer so quickly and firmly as that. I'm quite impressed.
Yeah. They're fascinating. They're just so different from anything else. In general, you look at these Australopith species, and sure, you can tell this species from this species by measuring some things and doing some fancy statistics, but they're kind of they're different versions of the same thing. They're basically a bunch of animals that are pretty darn similar. Sometimes you can tell them apart, but altogether they could fit in the same range of variation of a modern species. So they're not as different. These are different and weird. So that is really neat.
So where you've talked a lot about what is you talked a lot about what your research is going to entail and what you want to do. And of course, the pandemic is putting a huge, huge stopper on that.
Yes, it is.
What is, out of all the projects you talked about that you're working on, what is the one you're most excited to get back to as soon as restrictions are lifted and you can get back in?
I want to look at our Lemequi hominin fossils and really sort some of that out. That's my first item of business, my first thing that I really want to get back to and get that written up so we can get on to our next field project. But I'm also really excited about looking at the internal structure of the muscles of the hands and feet. I think we can say something really important and new about the evolution of locomotion and hominins, but also other primates. So I always keep sort of a lab at a field component. I'm now realizing with the pandemic, the benefits of a robust lab program that doesn't require travel. Travel has definitely been a problem because we got all these fossils out of the ground and we can't study them. We can't go there. So they're sitting there. And so we're going to try now that things are relaxing a little bit to get those analyzed. But there's other projects that it's also been just on hold, just waiting on the shelf for us to be able to travel.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, what would you recommend for people who want to just start learning about anthropology and paleoanthropology to do? Not necessarily students who want to pursue a career, but just people who are interested. What would you recommend they start doing?
Well, the World Wide Web is a magical, horrible and magical place, but there are lots of really great resources. Your interviews are terrific. They're going to get exposed to people through your website. There are other websites like the Institute of Human Origins Becoming Human website, which is really terrific. Just Google around at paleoanthropology sites, and there's actually quite a bit of resources out there and videos and educational activities. And I think that a lot of us now, there's much more of an emphasis on outreach through the National Science Foundation grants and things. We're required to do outreach, and many of us are rather committed. In fact, just before this interview, we were putting together a small proposal to make a pop-up natural history museum that goes around on a renovated school bus to different communities where people can come in and see fossils and learn things.
How cool.
Yeah, so there, look around for community events like that. If you're lucky enough to live near a museum, if you're in Chicago or New York or something, DC, go to the museum, go to the museum, go to the museum. But there are a lot of really great educational resources and things on the web where you can really learn quite a bit. And now also that the world has discovered Zoom and virtual interviews, we all waited to fly somebody over from wherever to give us a talk. But now there's so many more lectures and things on YouTube even. A bunch of different lectures. You can Google human evolution lectures and a whole host of things will come up for, us old timers and new people and all kinds of stuff that you get to hear different voices. So I would hit YouTube and hit the web and look for resources because there's a lot out there. And even people who want to get involved in resources and research, there are more and more digital models and information being posted on different websites. You can actually gather data and do research. And a lot of us are being pushed to put a lot of our data up in ways that we couldn't necessarily before. So
now, on the other hand of that, what would you suggest people avoid?
Well, a lot of things on the web, but a lot of things out there. Avoid being closed-minded. Avoid being swayed by, sometimes paleoanthropology gets a bad rap, and people make, and especially I think less so now, the world is much more open, but don't hesitate to ask questions and learn just because you've heard that nobody shows fossils or nobody shares things, or it's actually not true and it's never really been true for the most part. Just keep an open mind. Don't close your mind. Don't make it up too soon. Keep learning, keep discovering. If you think something sounds funny, keep doing some research. So I'd say sort of don't give up learning. Don't just read something, or if you hear something negative, just believe it. Keep asking, keep your mind open, I think would be mine. I don't know if that's the right sort of answer, but
Oh, it's perfect. I think that's great. Never give up. And yeah, if something, I like the saying, take what you like from a situation, and if the rest sounds a little fishy, do your research and figure it out for yourself. The internet is, of course, a wonderful and terrible invention that we humans have created. So now I have to ask, on your, let's see, maybe your left side, that femur
Yeah, this one.
looks quite, yes,
This
that
is
looks
just a good
quite
old
large.
femur. Yes.
It's
And the one that's next to it over here, they're whites. They don't show very well in the camera, but that's okay. This is a Lucy, the little tiny one, compared to a modern human. Because Lucy
wow.
has a lot of Australopithecus. So Australopithecus and the species lived from maybe a little over 4 till around 2 million years ago, give or take. And they were very like us in many ways, but their body size was much smaller. Lucy's one of the tiniest. She's sort of a cheap comparison in that way, but she's tiny, but otherwise structurally, she's built just like we are in terms of the femur for the most part. Oh, there's some nerdy details that are different, but we can tell, for example, that this femur's at an angle. And you notice if you stand up, you look down, your knees can be touching, but your hips are far apart. That's because your thighs angle in. So it's called a carrying angle, and it allows us to have our knees right below our center of gravity when we stand. Their hips are out to the side. And Lucy has that carrying angle also. So that's one of the first reasons we knew that Lucy was bipedal. We'd seen it in South African hominins before, but Lucy was older, so that was very exciting.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but is that called a vulgus knee?
Yes, valgus is another word. Call it carrying angle, call it valgus angle, other words for the same thing.
Perfect. Okay. So yeah, that a lot of people, I think, don't realize how small hominins are prior to Homo erectus.
Teeny.
And even I recently got sent a Homo naledi 3D print of the hand and the foot, and I was shocked. I was shocked. I mean, I have the craniums, but just the hands and oh my goodness, they were so small. And I think and that's another thing, I see your casts or your 3D prints behind you, and I think there's such a great resource for people to have. And when people don't get to actually see or feel these things, it really takes away from the learning experience.
Oh, absolutely. And it's been a problem in the past because before 3D technologies, sharing 3D objects wasn't possible. And a lot of the countries that have yielded fossils are not necessarily wealthy countries or not particularly well-developed countries that don't have a lot of infrastructure. So I work in Kenya. There's a fantastic national museum system there, but they still don't have a lot of resources. And so they have a casting program where they make and sell casts. You can buy casts. They're rather expensive because it just costs a lot for them to do. But it's a way for the museum, one of the only income ways the museums can get incomes. Other museums, say in Tanzania, Ethiopia, don't really have even a casting program yet. And even it's hard to do things digitally when you don't have, for example, reliable electricity or internet. So can Kenya put all its fossils on the internet? Well, if they had reliable internet, that would be something to work towards. Ethiopia, that the same sort of thing. So South Africa has been really great about scanning, making casts, getting things up there. They have the resources. That's really great. Some of the other African countries are moving more slowly for a variety of reasons. But I think there's going to be more and more digital archiving. There are some free online sources that we put, I worked on fossils from the site of Sterkfontein in South Africa, which is sort of a 2 to 3 million year old Australopithecus site. All those fossils are up for people to download and use free for anybody to use. And I know other teams have done the same thing. We're working to move towards that for some of the other museums, but there's some other logistic challenges that the museums are facing and trying to overcome. But the will is there, and that's going to be a lot more. It's going to be able to just increase equity, inclusivity in science, that people can see these. There is no substitute for seeing the originals if you're going to do serious science, because there's just things you never see until you look at the original. But people can get a whole lot of work and learning done by seeing things and hands-on. That's why we like to do a lot of hands-on community outreach, take things out into the community and share them. Because once you see it and you hold it, it's so much more meaningful.
100%. I completely agree with that. And again, that was one of the things that finally just hooked me into it when I started, was having bone clones prints, because I actually live a few miles from them. So the schools around us all get bone clones, but it was just, I don't know, there was an instant connection. I just felt those are our relatives, our ancestors, our cousins. And I think when people feel that and they get this unique enthusiasm that I don't really see in a lot of other places, that they just can't stop getting as much information as they can.
It's true. We feel, as paleontologists, I feel especially compelled to bring outreach because the world needs a scientifically literate public, and fossils
Yes.
are gateway science. Understanding genetics and DNA methylation, what is that even? No, it's really hard to understand. But you hold a jaw of a T-Rex or a hominid skull or something, and you connect to it and you see it, and we can use that to excite kids and the public about science. We can learn to teach, how do we learn about this fossil hominid? How do we ask and answer questions? And lo and behold, they're doing science without realizing it. So because of exactly what you're saying, that wonder and that fascination that so many people just instinctively feel when they see these, we can use that to help create a more scientifically literate public. And I think it's because we're object-based, and we have these creatures that are like nothing we live today, and some of them are us, our cousins. It's just so engaging, and I think it drives people to try to learn more. And the more people understand how we ask and answer questions, how we learn things, they understand how that's all of science. This is just a way of asking and answering questions. We can show them that rather than telling them. No one believes things when you tell them, but when they experience it from the self, then they see it, then they get it. So
Exactly,
experience is what they need.
100% agree with that. And I love to see that there are now places where it is so much easier to print 3D models. While of course they're not casts and they're not the originals, definitely, but they are so much better than just looking at a 2D picture in a book.
Oh, sure.
And I think it has opened up the world to so much more.
This is a 3D print. We printed it out on our printer down the hall, and we painted it to look sort of like the original, and it's terrific. And the nice thing is I could take this to schools, and somebody drops in a tile floor, print another one. So that's okay too. But yeah, it really is opening up the ability. We're developing some school activities that will come with a series of files that teachers can print, because a lot of schools now have printers, so people anywhere.
Right.
Now, it has not a lot of school districts, especially in outside the North America, don't have printers, but where we can, we try to reach schools as best we can, or provide them with kits and that kind of thing. So little by little.
Definitely. And go ahead.
Oh, little by little, we'll get there. Remember, you're probably not, but I'm old enough to remember a time where people didn't have paper printers, like printer printers, right? And now everybody has one. And I think 3D printers are going to be somewhat similar. Soon every school classroom is going to have a 3D printer. Maybe not soon, but at some point. And this kind of thing is going to become much more possible.
I definitely hope so. Because I think it is truly holding something in your hand. And I have a nice little collection of craniums myself, and just looking at them, I don't know, just looking into the orbits of them, even the eyes, it's just, there's a connection there.
There is. And I think another thing that we as a scientific community need to do is bring more outreach to the host countries where the fossils are from.
Yes.
Because very often you run into people who have no idea what you're doing. And there is no way to major in colleges a lot of times. There's a new master's program in paleoanthropology in Turkana University in Ludwar, but it's the only graduate degree in Kenya for studying paleoanthropology. So with any luck, more of that can happen. There'll be more places to bring school kids near where the fossils are found to see what their home territory, home area, home county, whatever neighborhood is giving the world. And I think some of these printing technologies and ways will help us disseminate in the host countries where the fossils are coming from to get more of those kids digging up their own fossils in their own country, which is what we really need to move towards.
Most definitely. And I think that is a wonderful place to leave off for this interview. I can't thank you enough for coming on. I hope to have you on again once the pandemic lifts and we can hear about some of your new work.
Love to.
It was a pleasure having you, and it was great.
Thanks. It was really terrific to be part of this. I love what you're doing. Keep it up. And I look forward to looking at more interviews as you create them. It'll be a lot of fun.
Thank you so much.
I'll come
All
back.
right, everybody. All right, everybody. That was a great interview. If you could please like and subscribe, we will see you next time.
Thank you for adventuring with us into the human past. If you've enjoyed this video, check out our website at www.worldofpaleoanthropology.org and find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.